Excellent. I think it's time to start the session. So that we don't actually spend time on just waiting for the minutes to go around. So my name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a senior program manager in Office 365 engineering. I'm kind of a weird person. My base location is actually Finland in Helsinki, and that's the reason of my Finglish. But you can hopefully understand what I'm actually talking anyway. So I work as a senior program manager in engineering. My main actually focus is Office 365 Developer Patterns and Practices program. And what we do with that one is that we try to help normal SharePoint developers to adapt the cloud and the app model way of doing stuff. And the app model way and enabling the app model also in on-premises, because that's where we are heading. We do have quite a few sessions coming up on that topic during this week as well. Today the session is all about branding, and branding specifically in Office 365. So we want to make sure that you understand what does it mean, what do we actually support, what do we don't support, and what is the impact of the chosen branding pattern. I'm going to do quite a few demos. There's quite a few slides, so I'm going to keep the pace ongoing. But I will be an Ask the Expert the whole evening in the Office 365 booth, where we will have, actually we have our own booth, the BMP, the Patterns and Practices booth there, and feel free to jump by and ask questions during the evening session as well. So let's start with the actual content. So we start with the introduction, kind of a thinking and how we should be approaching the branding within the Office 365, specifically for SharePoint Online. It's really important to realize that in Office 365 we have quite a few other services as well. So we're going to talk about that one in the introduction section before we move into more to the demos and more to the technologies, what we can do and can use to brand those individual sites. Just to be clear also, I'm not from marketing. So I'm from engineering, which means that this is not a flashy, oh my God, that looks superb demo. It's more about showing you the capabilities, the impact, and what you can do. And then if you are really a branding person, if you're really into responsive design, really on all of that stuff, you can adapt these techniques and actually apply that to your work to make magnificent UIs and all of that also in Office 365. Just setting the scene. I'm not a marketing person from engineering, so therefore it's not necessarily as flashy as the marketing demos. We'll go through the themes and the different theming options in Office 365. What is a SharePoint theme? What does it actually do from a branding perspective? What about Office 365 theme? What does it actually do? We're going to talk about the responsive experience. What does that mean? Also in the sense of the other services slightly, but we'll absolutely concentrate on a SharePoint side. And then the final topic is slightly on that, it's really about the branding as well, because quite often people tend to create custom master pages so that they can and include their own custom controls in those master pages. If you're an old school, that's a bad word. If you're a SharePoint on-premises SharePoint developer, don't quote me on that one. If you're an on-premises SharePoint developer, you're really used to write server-side controls and put them in a custom master page. And we're going to talk about that option as well. So how do we enable that stuff in Office 365? And what is the technology approach to do that? So there will be quite a few demos. I will be relatively fast on going through the material. If I can actually get the slides moving. Just a quick marketing slide, so to say. We really want to make sure that everybody knows in this room as well. If you think about the Office 365 and the Office 365 developer experience, it's not just about the SharePoint. It's really about the Office 365 APIs, and it's really about enabling functionalities all around, not just in SharePoint, but also in Office clients, and also the other services what we have in the Office 365 and in the Office. And it's really getting access on that data using whatever device and whatever means needed. SharePoint is absolutely highly used in Office 365, but there's a lot of other opportunities there as well for the developers to move on these things. I know that Tara and Fake and the marketing people are doing much better job on explaining this slide, so I'll let that one for them. And let's concentrate on the branding topics. So what I wanted to start is actually one slide which will explain the whole setup today. So if you really need to go to another session, this is the time to go after this slide. But essentially, we're going to talk about the master pages. We're going to talk about the impact of the master pages. And we're saying actually that avoid custom master pages. I'll come back on that one. It doesn't mean that we don't support custom master pages. We absolutely support custom master pages in Office 365. We're saying avoid. It doesn't mean it's not a black and white decision. And we're going to talk about that one today in the session as well. From a cost perspective, Office 365 themes is absolutely the easiest way to do stuff, easiest way to do branding. They are, however, highly limited. So you get a really limited set of branding settings, but for some scenarios that might be sufficient. And I'm going to quickly show what is an Office 365 theme today as well. The kind of a third option is then the alternate CSS, and that's actually really cool stuff. We're able to really change the SharePoint behavior by adding an alternate CSS entry on the side. And we're going to show that one in practice, and like I said, that's one of those demos which is designed, the graphical UI is designed by me, so it won't be really, really flashy. I'm an engineer, like mentioned. And then the final option is the JavaScript embed. So we're going to talk about that one slightly for the controls and lighting up functionalities within the sites without necessarily creating a custom master page. And all of these things are absolutely debatable, and that's one of the things what we want everybody to understand. There's no black and white decisions. There's no, you don't support X and Y and Z, or you do. There's options and there's impact of those options. And we're going to talk about those one during the session as well. So let's actually move on the things. Back in when we released the SharePoint 2013, there was an interesting blog post as part of the release cycle where somebody actually said something like following. You do not brand Outlook or Word. Why would you be branding collaboration sites? When I think of it, collaboration sites are tools. They're not a branding vehicle as such necessarily. They might be. But at the same time, we do not do branding in the Outlook or in the Word or in Excel. Do we really need to do branding in the actual SharePoint sites if we do collaboration? If we think about intranets, global communicational intranets, then the situation might be completely different. But the key point here is to think about the impact of that chosen pattern. Quite often, if you think about that, whenever you were upgrading from 2010 to 2013 in on-premises, quite often actually the most significant investment was to fix the master page. So the UIs and CSS and everything is working properly. And it's absolutely valid thing to do, and we're not saying that we wouldn't be supporting that. You can do that in the future as well, but it's really knowing that decision, making that decision knowingly where we're actually heading. And on that topic, kind of, if we start with an introduction side, how do we actually minimize the future maintenance? And I'm going to show a lot of this stuff absolutely in practice. But the thing is that we want to actually avoid custom master pages if we want to minimize the future maintenance for the sites. Because we are actually evolving the out-of-the-box master page in Office 365 services quite often. It is already running the SharePoint 2016 master page, to be precise. And if you would have used an older version of the master page, you would not have necessarily got all the new light-up functionalities. So it's a knowingly decision. It's recommendation to use alternative methods, but again, if you need to, you're absolutely fine to use a custom master page as well. The second kind of a point there, if you're a SharePoint farm solution person, might actually sound really weird. But we really are saying that start thinking through alternative ways of deploying your stuff within the SharePoint site. Sandbox solution is still supported, a mechanism to actually deploy your modules to individual master page gallery as an example. But it has an impact, again. It has an impact that then that master page has a dependency on that sandbox solution to be in present. And there are other impacts of that chosen pattern. So we slowly are starting to drive people to the direction where we don't no longer use feature framework, which is already almost 10 years old functionality or 10-year-old infrastructure or solution. So we're moving more on the remote provisioning model. And if you don't know what is a remote provisioning, feel free to, again, come to the Ask the Experts, and we're more than willing to show you some cool stuff about remote provisioning, how you can automate the deployments. Good. If you think about the constant evolution of the user experience in Office 365, we really need to, if you go back a few years and we think about the experience in the RTM version of the SharePoint 2013, this was actually the UI, the top bar on the SharePoint side. We had their newsfeed, we had a OneDrive, we had site, and it was saying SharePoint. That means that it's actually an on-premises master page because it's saying that. Then in the Office 365, we started evolving that user experience. At some point, the user experience was looking like this one. So we had then additional items in the top bar, like Outlook and Calendar and People and Newsfeed and OneDrive and Sites and Task and 3 dots. From behind, you could actually see additional capabilities. Well, that wasn't really a nice user experience when you think of it, because, for example, a video portal or something else might have been hidden inside of those 3 dots. And we can't just keep on adding those links in the top bar. And due to other reasons as well, we actually introduced the App Hub and the App Launcher. Seem to be walking too far, but the clicker will take it down. Good. So now it's looking like this in Office 365. The thing is, if you would have done a custom master page, it slightly depends what kind of customizations you do in your master page, you might or might not actually get this innovation. You might or might not get the innovation in a perfectly. You might get it in a slightly awkward way. There might be some things which are actually not rendered properly within the UI. And that's one of the reasons why we really want people to kind of think about the usage of the custom master page. The other dimension of this discussion is the other services. So this is a typical SharePoint site within the Office 365. It's branded using a theme, so it's not a significant branding. It could be much more significant UI changes if you think about that one. But then in the app launcher, people can go and click Yammer, or they could go and click Delve. And then they actually fall to that other side or other service within the Office 365. And that won't have that branding. Because we need to remember that Office 365 is not just about SharePoint. It's also about all of the other services and the new age or the new portal experiences which we are releasing all the time, like the functionalities related on Delve. And these functionalities, you don't actually brand them using a custom master page. You can actually do branding for them using Office 365 themes, and we're looking into other options in the future. But it's a different kind of a way how do we do the modifications for these functionalities. So if you would have a highly complicated or super complicated master page in a SharePoint site, when a person goes to these other services, it might feel like, wait, what's happening? There's a significant difference. So that's one of the things, again, to consider when we start writing and creating those custom master pages. The following slide is kind of an explaining that in practice. You might have seen this before, might not, let's see. But the whole point of custom master pages is that you quite often started a custom master page creation by copying the out-of-the-box master page. That's a pretty typical case. Then there's those advanced guys who can actually create from scratch, and that's a different thing. But quite often you started by copying the Seattle.master. If you did this, let's say, 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago in Office 365, it was a Seattle.master 15.x or whatever that means. It's a SharePoint 2013 version of the Seattle.master. But what has happened is that we have that continuous innovation in Office 365. We add new stuff on the service, and we light up functionalities within the master page. So what will happen is that after a while, there will be actually a new version of the Seattle.master, which is using 16.x versions of the controls and functionalities. 16 is actually SharePoint 2016. So essentially right now, if you would actually spin up a new site collection in Office 365, and you would download a Seattle.master, it would actually say that the control versions are 16 point whatever. It is already running the 2016 master page in some sense. There are differences between the on-prem and the cloud as well. But now, after a while, you will end up in a situation where your old custom master page is lagging behind. We will do the continuous innovation for those sites which are using out-of-the-box master page, and they're lighting up those functionalities. Your master page is not doing that. It might be a knowingly decision to do that you don't want to actually do that, but then you need to actually at some point do maintenance for that master page. And then somebody needs to modify that, align that with the actual service master page so that the new functionalities will properly light up for the end users. And that's essentially, in essence, this is the slide which is explaining the issue. Well, not an issue. I'm an ex-consultant. It's a challenge. And on the custom master page, it's a development opportunity. 8 years in consulting, you actually learn how to do messaging. Anyway. But you can't, anyway, bye-bye. Here we go. Now, if you think about the customer, we've been doing, I've done .com sites in on-premises. I've done significant corporate communicational intranets. And absolutely, there's always a need. If there are people who demand that custom master page, we can still do that. And when you think of it, nothing actually has been changed. What has been changed is that we go open and fully transparent on how do we do innovation in Office 365. And we want you to know that. Nothing actually has been changed from a supportability perspective or from a technology perspective. We just want you to be really aware of this challenge. And then you can actually make a knowingly decision, do I want to do that or not? And the same problem was actually, when you think of it, when we were doing SharePoint 2010 moving to 2013, that was pretty similar challenge. If we were using out-of-the-box Seattle.muster with an out-of-the-box theme sites and just with some themes or some CSS, you actually were easily upgradable to the following version. But if we were using a custom master page, that was a significant project, and then you needed to actually do cleaning and all of that stuff. It's the exact same challenge within the Office 365. We're just doing innovation in a much more faster time frame. One of the things what I kind of mentioned already is that how do I get the files uploaded to the SharePoint sites, just repeating the story. We really kind of also want to try people thinking away from the feature framework. So the sandbox solution is not necessarily the thing to do. The design package is actually using the sandbox solution engine. Absolutely supported. You're able to do that. You don't need to stop doing that right now, if that's the case, if you're using them. But it would be recommended to start gradually thinking through an alternative mechanisms away from the feature framework, because they will have a maintenance impact as well. And then there will be dependencies on the sandbox solution, and if somebody goes and deactivates the sandbox solution, there might be hiccups and challenges. So we're gradually moving away from that technology. Really want to be sure that everybody understands. I have an intranet portal. I need to do heavy branding. That's absolutely fine. We're not saying that that's not going to go away. But again, it has to be a knowing decision to do so. You're able to do this with collaboration sites as well, as long as you understand the impact of the chosen path. It's essentially there are options, and you just choose the right option from those options. So let's start with the different options. Say hi from Vesa, whoever is calling. So if you think about those alternative options, sorry for that. So one of the options is absolutely themes. In 2013, we introduced a new version, a new theming engine. We will be supporting this in the future as well. But it actually gives us the opportunity to laying branding elements on top of the sites without actually using custom master page. And it's actually surprisingly powerful. And we do have actually tooling to create these themes. Because one of the things that people don't know quite often is that how do I then create a custom theme? We do have this tool called SharePoint Color Palette tool, version 1.00. Don't ask why there's 2 zeros. I have no idea. It's just there. But what you can do with that one is in a matter of 2 minutes, you can actually spin up create a custom theme. And then it's just a matter of getting that available within the sites. This is downloadable from the MSDN download, Microsoft download site. If you search for SharePoint Color Palette tool, you'll actually get access on that one. I'm going to quickly show that one during the demo as well. Because as an ex-consultant, when I was doing pre-sales or customer consulting things, quite often, like 5 minutes before we showed how to do Office 365 development, I actually went to their internet-facing site, downloaded a background image, and then took their color scheme in 2 minutes, and I was able to then apply that theme to sites. And every single customer was like, wow, how did you do that? It's ready to be used. And I'm going to show that one in practice during the demo, because it's super powerful too. How do we do that then for the theming? We essentially, within the SharePoint site, there's some sort of a provider-hosted application. It might be a SharePoint-hosted application. It might be a console application. It might be actually PowerShell as well, which is running outside of the SharePoint. And what's that doing is essentially it is using a CSAM or RESTful APIs to upload the needed color file and an optional font file, an optional background image, and, well, it can actually use a custom master page as well to the site, and that will then switch the branding of the site itself. So using the RESTful APIs to actually modify the site's behavior before we do that. And let's actually have an example. So let's have a look on how does that work in practice. If I can get this switched. There we go. There we go. And going to the right site. One thing what I also wanted to mention, every single demo has a URL. All of the demos are from the Office 365 developer patterns and practices. So you're able to just pull down those demos and start using them by yourself if needed. This particular fellow, quickly just explaining what we have here. It is a provider-hosted application, which is just used, the provider-hosted application is just used to upload the files to the site and apply the theming. And let's be clear, you can do PowerShell, you can do console application, you can do whatever you want. This is just a tool and demo for me to show you the custom master page, custom theme in practice. So I'm going to do an F5 just to show you how things are moving. And we upload, essentially we run the application. It's going to upload the app file to the SharePoint. I've already done this earlier today, so it's not going to ask me permissions, even though it's a SharePoint app, because I already trusted this application. And it's working on it. Here we go. Then there's a small JavaScript hiccup, out-of-the-box hiccup. Sorry for that one. And let's switch here. So this is a simple demo. And again, this is really typical patterns and practices demo, which we want to do with patterns and practices guidance. Really, really isolated, really on the topic, so that whenever you want to learn how to do this in practice, from a developer perspective, you can just go and download the demo, and there's no additional, let's say, noise. You can concentrate on what am I actually doing. And this demo is relatively simple. So what's going to happen is that we're going to deploy a custom theme to the site. Before we do that, let's actually not do that yet. Let me show you that color palette tool. So this is the SharePoint color palette tool, which is free download from the Microsoft Download site. And this is how I created my Ignite theme. So I'm going to do that one more time. It's already set up in my application, but I'm going to quickly show you how it was done. So in my case, I just took what was it? It was a background image from the slides, which is this one. And I essentially chose that as my background image. So in the right corner, I'm going to zoom in a second. There's a setting called Change, and I click that one, and I can choose whatever image as my background image for the theme. And that's currently my site, or the theme variables. And then I can do recoloring. So let's actually select, I'm going to click that color thing, and there's a eyedropper, so I can actually pick a color, whatever color I want, and let's drag and drop that to that pink or purple. Click OK, and click recolor. And voila, and then we're able to switch to Seattle to UI, and we have a nice looking theme. And in a matter of 1 minute, we have already pretty nice looking site when I think of it. Now what I'm doing is only in my code. Somebody was clapping. Whee! So what I'm doing within my code, and I'm actually going to quickly put a breakpoint. I'm not going to deep dive on the code itself, because I wanted to show you so many options today. But I'm going to run through the code in a really quick way, just to explain what's going to happen here. Oh, that's a wrong button. There we go. And I'm going to go back on the browser and click that button, which is a deploy a custom theme. My breakpoint will hit. What we're doing essentially that we're creating a new custom theme. Actually, let's do a little bit more zooming so you can see on the back as well. There we go. And I'm uploading from my property hosted application a custom color file and a custom background image. And then I'm saying, using a code, using C, I'm using remote APIs, I'm saying, create me a theme called this one and apply that theme to my host site. Before I do that, let's actually have a look on the site. This is my current dev site. I'm just going to use the dev site today because I'm an engineering guy. Just as well, all of this functionality is obviously work within the team sites and publishing sites and all of that. So this is the site right now. Let's run through the code. It's going to upload those needed files to the SharePoint site in the SharePoint theming gallery. And then it's going to say, SharePoint, apply the theme. And what's going to happen is that the SharePoint is then extracting the theme colors and theme settings and the background image, and it's going to apply to the SharePoint site itself. It is actually a slightly time-consuming process because it's building CSS files on fly, but it didn't take more than 20 seconds or 10 seconds. And so let's have a look on that host web, and we're able to see that we have a nice-looking Ignite theme available for the site itself. We get the background image, we get the coloring in a second. There we go. Here we go. And we have a nice background theme, which is already pretty good looking, right? Not too bad. In the sense of 2 minutes of work. So that's pretty okay. So pretty simple stuff. Hey, somebody was clapping. But again, if you need to have more capabilities, this is really simple stuff, but and this could be sufficient for your SharePoint collaboration sites. But then if you need to have more capabilities, let's start building on top of, let's start adding additional functionalities on top of this one, or additional options. What I'm going to quickly do, though, I'm going to switch back on the Office theme before I'm going to the sites, so I'm able to then continue from a clean site from a demo perspective. And then I'll switch back on the slides for a few different slides, and we'll go back on the demos after that. Good. So if the SharePoint themes, if that's not sufficient, if you need to do something more, if you need to do something slightly more than that, what we can do is that we're able to take advantage of the alternate CSS URL property. And this is a property within the web level, within the site level. The SharePoint site and the web is always so confusing. It's an web level, where we're able to say that whenever the SharePoint renders the site, that CSS will be rendered as well. And we don't have to modify the out-of-the-box master page to do this. So in the same way, we are able to use the remote APIs to actually upload, first of all, upload the master CSS to the site. So again, we have some sort of a tool. It could be a PowerShell, it could be a console application. However, we are essentially uploading the CSS files and images to the site, and then we set that alternate CSS URL property to the site. And that's going to then reshuffle the whole site, and it's going to look different. But that gives us much more opportunities than the SharePoint theme, because that's highly limited. That's just colors and fonts and the background image. But now that it's up to the CSS, what do we actually have? We can do much more than just that simple coloring. And let me actually show you this one in practice as well. I almost forgot that, like mentioned, the URLs within the demos, you can go and download the code from there. And it's available for you to use as well. And this is one of those demos which I'm not super proud of the user interface design, but as I said, I'm from engineering, so bear with me. The marketing people would make this much more better looking, and that's probably the future of what we're going to do. Right now, we're not quite there yet. So let me switch on the Visual Studio side. Let me show you this one in practice as well. The setup is pretty similar. It's a provider-hosted application, but just for the sake that I have a button, so I'm able to activate the thing. Like mentioned, it doesn't have to be an app. It could be a PowerShell, which is adding that CSS to the site, and it's enabled within the site level. Let me run the sample, F5. All of the patterns and practices samples are quite often, a majority of them are that you pull them down, you set the URL, you do an F5, you're ready to go. So you're able to then test how the functionality actually works in a real world. Working on it. There we go. And there's the JavaScript exception. This is not mine. It's out of the box, JavaScript exception, which sounds weird, but it is what it is. And again, this is typical patterns and practices example. We have a buttons which we're able to enable and disable the functionality. We're able to light up the new custom UI, and then we're able to clear that UI. And these are really isolated. The patterns and practices samples are isolated. They're trying to prove a point. Like in the previous case, what we're doing is that we're uploading the CSS to the site. So we are essentially using CSUM to add that CSS, the styling file, to the right location within the site. And then we're adding that alternate CSS URL properly, which will then change the UI completely. And here we go. The CSS has been applied, and the host web, let's see, do we have, it was the out-of-the-box theme site. And now if I do refresh on the site, you can see a pretty significant change within the UI rendering. And I said this, I'm not super proud of this design, but it proves a point. It proves a point, right? This was not about mesmerizing you from a flashy things. This is more about you can do really brilliant stuff using these technologies and approaches. And now it's all about the CSS skills. This is the level of CSS skills I have, but hopefully you guys have much more better CSS skills than to make the sites look much better. But what's really interesting about this one, I don't know if you know this, but it's now centrally aligned. Also, what's interesting about this one is that we relocated some of the elements. So for example, this share, follow, and edit, that's not usually over there. That's now relocated using the CSS, so we've been able to do quite a significant changes and modifications. And we also changed the top bar color using the CSS overriding mechanism. Relatively simple, but again, using this method, we are still using out-of-the-box master page. So now whenever we are lighting up new functionalities in an out-of-the-box master page, you are getting all of those things within your sites. But still, you're able to do pretty significant styling. The reality is that, yes, we might actually change some of the CSS classes and some of the CSS elements at some point, but then it wouldn't break your site. It would just maybe disable some of the functionalities, but it wouldn't be a significant delay of getting additional functionalities to a custom master page, which hopefully makes sense. Good. Moving back on the slides, let's do one slide and come back on the demos again. While we are actually doing that, I'm going to quickly reset that site. And the microphone voice goes up and down. That's probably my bad. So one of the options what we also wanted to go through is Office 365 themes. So Office 365 themes is the one option which applies all around the Office 365. And what we do with this one is that we're able to keep some sort of a branding elements and control within Office 365 services. Not only SharePoint, but also Delve and Yammer and all of these other services which we're bringing more and more into Office 365. The thing is, right now it's implemented in a way that if SharePoint site has a custom theme, the Office 365 theme will be ignored. Even though from some perspective somebody said quite nicely that, well, the Office 365 theme is controlled by the tenant admin, so that should actually override all of the settings within the sites if needed. And we're introducing some additional functionalities with this one in the later stage. But right now you're able to already provide some level of branding elements using just UI, using browser. And this might be good enough for you, for example, for collaboration sites. So essentially what we're doing is that you're able to add a custom logo, you're able to add colors, which are then reflecting the top bar of your sites and the services. So in the Yammer, in the Delve, and all of that, you have that top bar, which is in my case, it's now in purple, and there's a background image, but it's already reflecting that to be consistent across all of the services within Office 365. It's simple, it's super cost efficient, because you're only using the browser. So you don't have to do any additional settings to enable that. And since people have quite hard time of finding this functionality quite often, let me actually show you where the Office 365 themes are. So I'm going to close that one and going to just double check that this is clean. That was ugly. And I'm going to switch back on. There we go. And I'm going to just, that's fine. Where's my site? Here we go. So my Office 365, if I go to admin settings, and from the admin settings, then I go to company profile, and in the company profile settings, we do have, well, it's been there since last autumn, we have an option called custom theming. And like I said, we're looking into adding additional options here as well. But what we can do from here is then control the top navigation top bar, which will be then consistent across all of the services, not only SharePoint, but Delve and Yammer and all of that stuff as well. So I can do something like set up a background image. Let me do that one. So let's select an Office 365 optimized, and that's going to then light up the functionality within the top bar in a second. Upload the file. There we go. And now I have a nice background color there. I can understand what the text is. Let's switch that one to something else, maybe purple, and a custom accent color to set up purple as well. And there we go. We have a company might have company branding set up properly across all of the services. And it is highly limited, no doubt. It's only the top bar setting. But it still can bring some sort of a company branding, some sort of a company feeling. And for example, it could actually have a URL and a logo on the middle of the bar as well. So you can always land to the front page of your corporate communication intranet by clicking that logo from anywhere, any of the services within Office 365. But if nothing else, this is highly cost efficient because you're using a browser to do that. You don't have to do any code, you don't have to do PowerShell or Sandbox Solutions or whatever is your chosen technology. Good. Let's move on the following things and move on the discussions. There's the slides. Now, obviously the typical discussions afterwards when we start to talk about the custom, not using custom master page, is then, well, but I need to have a custom master page to be able to do responsive SharePoint. And that's partly true, but it's partly not true. you are actually able to do responsive SharePoint just by using the CSS and using the alternate CSS option, which I actually showed you before. And let's actually have a look on that one, that implementation in a second. But quite often, you are able to actually bring a responsive UI which is scaling properly and making the SharePoint scale in some level in a responsive way. There are, however, a few things to be aware. Whenever we do this one, it requires CSS, significant amount of CSS, and there's quite a lot of web parts in SharePoint which do not scale necessarily in a responsive way. So it's not really about having a custom master page. It's about having all of the functionalities in SharePoint being fully responsive. And that's not necessarily something what we can do using the alternate CSS. But we can get it pretty okay in an adequate level. The key point also on the responsiveness in general in Office 365 is that all of the new functionalities what we're introducing, like Delve or the new portal experiences, these are responsive by design. So we're thinking through and all make sure that the responsiveness and using different devices, different screen size is natively supported within the Office 365. The SharePoint, however, is a pretty old school functionality, and there's quite a lot of web parts and functionalities and combinations, so making that fully responsive natively within the Office 365, which requires a significant amount of resources. We are looking into different options, but right now the option is not quite there. I'm going to show you where we can go with the CSS, but it's not, let's say, 100% experience. But the key point, obviously, is that all of the new functionalities where we're investing, they will have the native responsive feeling, and they will scale properly within the SharePoint itself. Good. Let's have a look on this one as well. So transforming out-of-the-box master pages to be responsive with a custom CSS. How do we actually make that happen? And there's, again, the link, the URL, or the GitHub, where you can actually then set that properly for that. When you can download the sample and start checking how does it actually work. So switching back to my site, I'm going to quickly remove that top bar, ugly looking colors. Let's clear these custom theming and let's do save. So we can actually see in practice using out-of-the-box theming, out-of-the-box colors, what we can do. Good. I'm going to jump in my Office dev site. So here we go. And if you think about SharePoint experience by default, you know this because that's one of the reasons why you're sitting in this session. That if we start scaling the SharePoint, it really doesn't scale that well. Slightly depends what we have on the page, but it doesn't actually do the proper responsive way of doing stuff. And screen size of one device could be this small. You can't really do that then with SharePoint. Slightly depends again on the device and how does it actually work. What we can do, however, is that we're able to take advantage of that alternate CSS property in the sites, and which will help us to light up the responsiveness within the SharePoint. And let me show you this one in practice. So this particular example is actually a console application in the Patterns and Practices guidance. And what it does is that it asks what is the site where we are connecting to, and then it actually uploads the needed CSS and attaches that to the site, and suddenly it actually makes the sites, in responsive. And I'm going to show you that in practice. It's not 100%, but it's already proving the point. So let's actually run the sample. It's going to ask me the URL, so I'm going to go to the URL and copy the URL. Oh, there we go. Give Office 365 site URL. I'm going to just copy the URL from the browser. And I'm going to paste in that there. Then it's going to ask me my username, so I need to log in, obviously, to be able to modify the site. And let's keep it a proper password. And now what happens is that within the code, we are, first of all, uploading assets, which essentially means that we are adding that needed CSS element. In this case, it's an element from Heather Solomon, who actually wanted to share that with us. She has also, Heather Solomon is she's been around for years and years within the SharePoint branding, and she's one of the really great gurus on CSS as well in the SharePoint side. And she provided the example for us. But what we're doing here is that we take an instance on the site assets folder or the library within the SharePoint. Again, we need to get the CSS somewhere, so we're able to point that to the site itself. We get an instance to the root web. We have the CSS file is locally within my provider hosted application. Essentially, it could be, again, sorry, this is not a provider-hosted application. It's CSS in my file system, which the provider, the console application is then uploading to the site, using the file creation information, essentially using remote APIs, using a RESTful APIs, CSAM APIs to upload the CSS to the right location. And there we go. If you're a SharePoint farm developer, this is the same as doing module element in the feature XML. But it's uploading the file to the right location. It's then setting that property to alternate CSS property to the site. Let me scroll that slightly down. There we go. It's pointing to the file now in the site assets folder, and we're updating the property. All executed. Let's go back on the site, and hopefully we will have some interesting changes on the site behavior. So I'm going to refresh the site. I'm not hoping I know that it's going to actually work. And now, right now, that's a promise of a demo god jumping in. Being too confident on this one. So let's take I'm going to start moving this one. So now the CSS is actually taking care of the responsiveness for us. So right now already, the text box is moving on down underneath the navigation. If I continue moving on left, we're seeing that the site is actually getting squeezed. Left side navigation is going away. We still have the top navigation there, but also when we go too small, it's better to show the top navigation as a drop-down bar on there. Yay! Hey! So, and the reason why I want to be super honest and pinpoint the issues, obviously, as well, because this is not just super successful, but absolutely it scales and it works. There are certain styling issues and all of that, but it proves a point. We can actually make the SharePoint pretty much responsive. The challenge, however, this is actually showing the challenge as well, which is that web part underneath. Not all of these web parts are responsive. So this doesn't actually scale in the same level. But the master page and navigations and all of that are actually now responsive, and it's scaling properly between the sites. And that's pretty cool. It's an out-of-the-box master page using the CSS, and it's now modifying the site to be responsive. We know that there's quite a few partners who actually worked on this one as well. We know that they worked on their own solutions, which is an alternate CSS, and then you're able to take advantage, for example, technology called JavaScript embedding, which I'm going to show quite slightly later still today, which can modify then the experience from an end user perspective to be even better. So it can actually resize or it can actually reshuffle the web parts as well. It does require some code. So in this particular case, as an example, and like mentioned, the CSS and the example is available in Patterns and Practices. I'm going to just quickly show you the CSS. There's quite a lot of CSS definitions, which are then resizing dynamically the site as we go. But we're still using out of those master pages. So whenever we, as a Microsoft, we introduce new functionalities to the pages or the service, you're getting all of those slider functionalities to be available. If you're a CSS wizard, you can probably understand actually what's happening here, and we're able to make things actually here we go. So we're able to make things actually fully responsive. But this is absolutely proving the point, if nothing else. Good. Moving back on the slides, we have still some content to go through, and one more actually interesting demo on lighting up functionalities and lighting up the user experience functionalities within the sites as well. Before we go there, let's actually have a summary. And this is really the key point what we want to come across for everybody who's working in Office 365. We do have multiple different branding options in SharePoint. We've gone through them pretty much today, so we can do Office 365 themes. The flexibility is fair because it's only the top bar all the way through on the top. And it's only in Office 365. But it's really cheap because all you need is a browser. You go there and click through the settings and you're good to go. The second option is then the SharePoint themes. SharePoint themes, which is flexibility is average. We can do background image, we can do colors, we can do fonts, but we can't really relocate stuff. We can do a significant styling, like we can do then with the third option, which is an alternate CSS. And then we can actually have a really good flexibility from a branding manipulation perspective. The cost level is slightly bigger than Office 365 themes, but it's sufficient. Somebody might argue that the properly done alternate CSS has a pretty significant difference for a SharePoint theme, which is absolutely true and might be true. Then the third and the final option is still absolutely the custom master pages. That's where we have the ultimate flexibility. You can do whatever you want, but then you need to understand that it might actually bite you, because you're not getting all of the new functionalities within the Office 365. You're essentially taking responsibility on then introducing those, or making sure that doing updates on the master page itself. Somebody absolutely might say that, wait, isn't that kind of a design fault on Office 365? And yeah, maybe it is. We're working on a much more longer-term solution in the new portal areas, and I know that there's quite a few sessions this week on the new portals as well, where we are explaining then where we're heading with the portal thinking. But right now, SharePoint options, these are the options. The custom master page, it's still the same custom master page option as we could have done in Office 3 on premises as well. But it has an impact. We need to be aware of that impact, and that's it. Good. The final topic. Let's talk about still slightly more on, okay, what about then those custom controls? I know that there's a lot of SharePoint developers in the audience who've written custom controls, custom server-side controls. I've written like 7 different left-side navigational controls in my life, or 17. It's a typical thing that people usually write within the on-premises when they start doing custom master pages. They want to light up or show functionalities in a different way. How do we actually do that in Office 365? How do we approach this custom control and the UX behavior in the Office 365? And the answer is something which we call right now as a JavaScript embedding or JavaScript embed. And what that means is that we actually embed a custom JavaScript to light up that functionality for us in Office 365 without a custom master page. So you don't actually have to, again, have a custom master page to do this. So the old model, if you think about this one, this is just an example case. It's a pretty good-looking sample case, even though it's designed by me and implemented by me. But it's a scenario. We want to have a cross-site collection functionality, cross-site collection navigation functionality. We want to be in a way that wherever the end user is within this tenant, there's an intranet link on every single SharePoint site, and they click that one, they will land to that intranet front page. And then there could be a personalized links, and there could be additional links which are cross-site collection links. In this case, there's intranet and tools, but there could be much more than that, just below that top bar. We don't want to modify the top bar. You don't want to go there and modify the top bar, but you can modify the site behavior if you are careful, and let's talk about that one during the demo as well. But essentially what we're doing is that we're adding that dynamically, that second-level navigation, right after the app launcher, before the SharePoint content, so to say, actually starts. And that's then rendering that second-level navigation within intranet and tools. And again, we can do this without any custom master page changes, which is actually pretty cool. So how do we make this happen? Same story as with the other examples. We need to have somebody who's remotely accessing the SharePoint itself and adding that functionality to the SharePoint side. Using in this particular case, if you're a developer, it's using the user custom action collection and adding a JavaScript definition to that one, which will then be rendered whenever we actually are on the sites of the SharePoint sites. So essentially, there will be a reference to an external JavaScript hosted somewhere. It could be hosted in a SharePoint, it could be hosted in a CDN, Content Delivery Network, it could be hosted in an Azure, which is then rendered as part of the page rendering. And that's then taking ownership of rendering that control. And it might sound like, wait, but isn't that kind of a hacky? Well, somebody might say that as hacky, but when you think of it, Yammer embedding, or if you ever actually embedded any map controls in the SharePoint sites or any internet-facing sites, what you do is that you actually create a div, and give a name and ID for the div, and then you reference some JavaScript outside of the somewhere. It's usually a Bing Maps JavaScript or Google Maps JavaScript. And then suddenly that div actually lights up. Suddenly it's a map. Suddenly it's a Yammer embedding control. Suddenly it's a Facebook embedding control or whatever. We're taking advantage of the exact same thinking, but we're now putting that in the context of SharePoint. So we're essentially referencing an external JavaScript file, which will then light up the functionality and will essentially do the proper settings and apply all the proper UX for the end users. So let's have this one. Let's have a look on this one in practice. Again, one of those patterns and practices examples, which are available for you to download and use as any way as you want. Yes, you're able to see my Visual Studio. Good. Just wanted to double check. And this one is called, it's slightly misleading. There's a long story why it's called OD4B. Originally, this second level navigation was actually requested by one of our global customers for a certain hybrid scenario, because they wanted to have a link back from the Office 365 pointing to on-premises. And then we for the OneDrive for Business sites, and that's the reason why it's called OD4B nav links injection. But absolutely, it works with the out-of-the-box theme sites as well, like we'll see right now in the demo. So I'm going to do one more time. The thing what we need to do, like mentioned when we started for this demo, is just update the site URL, and then we're good to go, pointing to your own Office 365 tenant. If you're a developer and don't know what's an Office 365 tenant and you're interested, come to our Office 365 booth today, ask our experts, and we'll help you to get started. And lighting up the functionality, and then I need to again activate the functionality by clicking a button. Usually this functionality and all of these settings, the themes, the CSS, the JavaScripts and all of that, would be applied to these sites as part of the site provisioning. We're not going to do that demo today, but usually it's part of the site provisioning. Whenever somebody creates a site collection in Office 365, we apply the needed branding automatically as part of the site collection creation. And that's part of depends slightly on your process. How do you control your sites? How do you want to automate that? So it wouldn't be actually end user coming somewhere and clicking a button. I really want to be clear on that. And this is just, again, showing how to light up the functionality in an isolated way. I'm clicking the button just to activate that on the site. And do I actually have... Oh, I can actually have a look on the site before. That's the site right now. We didn't actually remove the responsiveness from the site, so that's fine. But now if I refresh the site, we can actually see a second level navigation suddenly reappear right underneath the top bar. And it's actually pretty good looking stuff. Let me zoom in so you're able to see what's actually happening here. So there we go, and that thingy there is actually extra. That's not out of the box. But that's something which could actually have a personalized links. It could have a cross-site collection links. It could be dependent on a particular user's organization or a role. There could be a different set of links. Or it could be driven by taxonomy term sets within the taxonomy store. It's again up to you or up to the use case. How do we want to actually implement this functionality? But now if I'm on the site front page, that's there. If I go to the site contents, the second level navigation is still there. Whatever I do, if I go to documents, that the functionality is there. And we're able to now light up this or bring or introduce new UX controls, again, using out-of-the-box master page. So we don't have to we don't have to go to that custom master page story, because if we don't want to. Again, we could if we want, but anyway. How does this actually work? So let's have a look on that one quickly. So what's actually happening in the code, and what are we actually doing for lighting these things up? I'm going to just open up the code and explain what's happening there for the developers. So you're able to do this one in practice as well. All of this, much more in MSDN and in our patterns and practices guidance. How do we actually make these things happen? What are the recommendations? But in this particular case, what we have is that we're calling an add.js link method. I'm going to go to the method. I'm going to scale this slightly bigger. And what we're doing is that we are building a JavaScript entry, which is essentially, it's adding on the head, using JavaScript, we are adding on the head element of the page a reference to a JavaScript file, which is actually hosted in my provider-hosted application in this case. So the provider-hosted application, which would be running in Microsoft Azure, or it might be running, it could be a JavaScript in CDN, Content Delivery Network, is going to be dynamically loaded by this piece of a JavaScript, which is then added to the user custom action collection. So we're using remote APIs, essentially saying, SharePoint, whenever you are entering any page within the site, make sure that this JavaScript is also executed as part of the page rendering. And then the JavaScript is actually the one which is lighting up those functionalities and whatever is need to be lighting up within the site. So from a browser perspective, if we switch back in here and have a look on what's actually happening, I can do F12, which is the browser UI. And as part of the rendering of the site and part of the rendering of the page, where do we have it? There we go. We do have a scenario 1, if I remember correctly. Do I need to go and have a look? Yes, I do. Oh, there it is. It's inject navigation. There we go. So there's one additional JavaScript file which is loaded as part of the execution of the page. And that's dynamically loaded. It's not in the page. It's not in the master page. It's part of the settings what we have now on the SharePoint site, which is essentially making this to render. And I'm going to open up that one in a Visual Studio because that Visual Studio has much better zooming capabilities. So I'm actually able to show what's happening within that JavaScript. The first settings is more about making sure that regardless is the minimal download strategy enabled on the site or not, our JavaScript will be executed properly. The following thing what it's actually doing, it is executing the remote manager inject. It's just a method in the JavaScript, which is then dynamically loading, making sure that we have a jQuery available in our page as well. So therefore, the jQuery has been rendered, and we're able to take advantage of the jQuery itself. Then what we do is that we essentially use the local storage, meaning that we are caching in a process side the rendering of the navigation, because we don't want to build the navigation in every single request. It might be that the navigation is having that personalized experience. You don't want to actually hit taxonomy store or the user profile store or the user profile service in every single request. You want to store that information. You want to take advantage of the local store. And then what we're doing is that we're building that navigation and we're adding that navigation on the page. This is the part which is not super, well, it's pretty ugly if I'm going to actually go to the right section. So essentially what we do is that we are using jQuery to figure out what is the structure. There seems to be a battery issue on the microphone, sorry for that. So we're using jQuery to go to the DOM structure of the page. We're figuring out what is the location within the page where we want to add that control. And right now, in this particular example, we are just writing or creating that JavaScript, the HTML dynamically, which will then render those individual links. It's pretty ugly looking JavaScript, I know, but it could be much more dynamic. It could be driven by taxonomy store time sets. It could be driven by the user profile properties and so on. Again, up to you, how do you want to implement that? It could be a SharePoint list within the root side of the tenant, which is having link and a target link and a target, and then we're reading that. The whole point of the patterns and practices examples is that they're proving a point. And then depending on a case, are we in a OneDrive My site, OneDrive for Business site, or are we in a team site, we're adding that in the right location. And voila, we have that second level navigation light up properly on the site, and there we go. We essentially have a custom control, which is not requiring us to have a custom master page. Interesting option, at least in Office 365. Thank you. Good. Let's do a few more slides, and we think it seems to be that we have a time for a few questions, which is actually good because we've been having that pace with the demos as well. But hopefully you've been able to figure out some new ideas within the Office 365 branding. The one thing what you need to be aware on that JavaScript injection is that if we are introducing significant changes in the HTML structure of the page, then some of your functionalities might not work properly. And this is something which we are also working inside of the Microsoft and in the engineering, figure out, can we actually introduce static IDs or static locations within HTML structure of the master page and the site, so which you will know that they're in the right location. We're looking into these options, and we absolutely want to have your feedback on these approaches, so we're able to build your UIs and your user experience using a standardized and a proven patterns, which is really important, obviously, for us as well. Good. As a summary, this is the summary slide, actually. I was slightly faster than expected, but that's absolutely fine. Better this way than keeping you too long on the room. Avoid custom master pages. We're not saying, again, it's not supported. It's absolutely supported, but think through, we have those multiple options. You're able to do multiple other ways of doing the branding. Use Office 365 themes when possible. That's really cheap. You go to a browser and we may set that settings in the Office 365 admin UI and you're good to go. The alternate CSS is a better option than a custom master page, because then you're actually modifying the rendering rather than losing the out-of-the-box master page innovations which we are introducing all the time. And then the final functionality what we showed was the JavaScript embed, light up UX functionalities and navigational elements within the site in a nice way as well. So you don't have to always write a custom master page to come up with these things. The final URL, if nothing else, if you're highly interested on these things, and especially from a developer perspective, Office 365 Developer Patterns and Practices, aka MS Office Dev PMP, you will land to dev.office.com, and all of these samples and all of these functionalities and much, much, much more is available then for you to actually start adapting our recommendations. There's quite a few other URLs what we're using, like the Office, aka MS Office Dev PMP Yammer, which is our Yammer group, which is the biggest developer Yammer group in Office 365 network, where people are asking, and it's a highly active Yammer group. It's one of those groups where yammering actually works, which is awesome. Did I actually say that out loud? Whoa. But that is really active group, and there's a lot of active people. We are here, the Patterns and Practices group is there to help you with the questions and help you with the things as well. And we have videos and training material. That's one point as well. If you are a trainer or if you want to do training, we have ready-to-use training material with hands-on labs and videos for you to deliver within your own local country or for your own local company. Feel free to take all of this and observe and start using that as much as possible. But thanks for your time, and hopefully that was useful. Thanks. We can still do some questions in a microphone if somebody wants, or you can absolutely come here, ask questions, or go to the Ask Experts after this one for the questions.